Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for February 26, 2018. On today's show, we're going to be talking only about one bit of news, and that is that filmmaker Kevin Smith suffered a heart attack. But most of this podcast is actually going to be a spoiler-room discussion of Annihilation, which came out this weekend, and you probably didn't see. I hope you did see it, because it's a great film, and we'll be talking about spoilers, the ending, what it all means, the differences from the book, the original script, and what the sequels would have been about, and much more. So please come back to that once you have seen the film. This is Peter Sciretta, and joining me for today's podcast are Slash Film Weekend Editor, Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
Slash Film Senior Writer, Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
And writers Hoai-Tran.
Hey, everyone.
And Chris Evangelista.
Hello.
Okay, before we get into the spoiler room, let's dive into a little bit of sad movie news, and that is Clerks director Kevin Smith suffered a massive heart attack. Brad, what do we know?
Yeah, just last night, apparently, Kevin Smith was doing back-to-back stand-up shows in Glendale, California, and I guess he was feeling kind of sick after the first show. He had thrown up and felt kind of listless, tired, whatever, and was sweating, and then just started feeling like some serious pain, and so his two of his friends who were there with him called the ambulance. He was rushed to the hospital, and I guess he had a massive heart attack. Apparently he had a clogged artery, and this specific artery is the LAD artery, which is apparently known as the Widowmaker, because apparently when it goes, you're a goner. And if they hadn't canceled the second show and he wasn't rushed to the hospital, then he probably would have died. If he would have had if it would have been any worse by the time he realized what was going on. But thankfully, he was in the hospital last night when he posted all of this on Instagram, and he seemed to be recovering just fine. Wrote a very intimate post about how he was like reflecting on his life when he thought that maybe he might go out. It's a very personal and touching post from him, but I'm personally I'm glad that he's doing well. No matter how much shade Kevin Smith gets thrown at him nowadays for being a very vocal fan and for his recent films, I will always be a Kevin Smith fan because his comedies like Clerks and Dogma and Mallrats all influenced me when I was in high school. And when I've met him several times now, just running into him at Comic-Con and various events, and he always takes the time to have an extended conversation with pretty much anybody. But
yeah, not even just because you write for Slash Film. I've seen him spend way more minutes than he should with just random people on the street.
Yeah, exactly. He's the most jovial, friendly dude. He's so appreciative of his fans. And whenever I've talked to him, it's always been just a great conversation. He's the nicest guy, and so I'm glad he's doing well. It would really be really sad if we had lost him. So hopefully he has a speedy recovery, and he'll be around for a while longer.
Yeah, say what you will about his recent films, but his early films, I think, were a huge influence on the independent film boom. They were definitely a huge influence on my life. I even went to one of his Vulgar Fests in Red Bank, New Jersey, back in the day, and I was lucky to become friends with him for a good period of time when Slash Film was first starting, and he even invited to his house to see an early cut of Zack and Miri and stuff. We've fallen apart in recent years, probably because Kevin Smith just stopped giving a fuck, but I hope he has a speedy recovery. I hope this is something that, I hope the end is not near for Kevin Smith. I hope he can get well, and I think we can say all of our collective thoughts are with Kevin Smith and his family, and hope he recovers. Let's now jump into the spoiler room. We're going to be talking about Alex Garland's Annihilation. So if you have not seen Alex Garland's Annihilation, you'd be stupid to listen to this, because we're going to be talking about the ending in depth. We're going to be talking about the themes in depth. We're going to be talking about the book, the script. So if you have not seen the movie, shut this off here, go see the movie, and then, play this in your car as you're driving home from the movie theater. We have the Slash Filmcast to do full-on reviews of movies and dive into kind of that aspect of things. So I don't want to make this a film review because, we already have a podcast that does that. But let's go briefly, before I go briefly down the line and get your impressions of the movie, I'll say my impressions. I think this is, going to be remembered as a great, elevated genre movie for years to come. We're going to be coming back to this just as we came back to like Aliens, maybe not in that high of esteem, but, this movie is just a visual treat, has some amazing ideas that I think we're going to see sci-fi films borrow from years to come, especially with aliens being more of an environmental thing than creatures and stuff. I really, really enjoyed this film. It's definitely in my top 10 of the year so far. Not that we're that far into the year. I guess if I have any criticism of the movie, it is that, it didn't get me that emotionally involved and didn't, I guess, for me, say something more about this world and me. Do you know what I mean? Like when I go to a film, like a sci-fi film like that, like Arrival or, those kind of films that I think speak deeper to you. I know that I am probably in the minority in that respect. So let's go. Ben, what are your thoughts on this film?
I really, really liked this movie. I don't know if I love it just because I'm still sort of baffled by it, to be honest with you, but I think that's probably part of the intention of the movie is to baffle you in a way. It really is one of the most gorgeous and unsettling experiences I've had at the movies in a long time. I think, Peter, for you were talking about how it didn't necessarily emotionally click for you, but I think for me, it's sort of it clicked and worked on a level that was deeper than just relating to the characters. It was more of like experiencing the entire vibe that Alex Garland created on this movie, and just getting in the headspace of letting this movie wash over me, and really like being okay with not fully understanding it, but walking out of the theater with a ton to think about, which is more than I can say about most movies. Chris and I were actually talking on Twitter briefly about how it sort of reminded us a little bit of The Fountain. I feel like this movie could be, some sort of loose cousin to Darren Aronofsky's movie in that it's so ambitious and so just ambitious in the things that it tries to say and the ways that it tries to say them. So I'll let everybody else go and stop rambling now. But yeah, I really like this movie.
I liked it too, but I'm actually more on your side, Peter, in that I really admired it. I thought it was beautiful and mesmerizing, but there's something that I didn't quite connect with, and I could see its themes that were sort of simmering under the surface, and I really admired what it was doing and what it tried to do. But for me, there is nothing that quite clicked like Arrival did. And I can see like the arguments that it's uninterested in catering to the audience and having some sort of meaning or having to derive some sort of meaning from everything. But for me, it just felt very clinical and subdued in that sense. I actually kind of wished it was even more surreal and wilder, because that would have been what would really draw me in, I think. And I was drawn in. There were moments that were incredibly just like stark and stunning for me. But it was something that I think I expected a lot out of, just because it's, again, like the whole expectation thing. I was hearing so many good things about it, so I was expecting to be sort of blown away. And instead, I was sort of treated to something that was much more subtle. And I appreciate that, but it wasn't quite exactly what I expected.
Yeah, I'm definitely in love with this movie too. It took me a while to really soak it in and come to love it. I definitely knew that I liked it a lot by the time it was over, and just the more I thought of it, because I couldn't get out of my head, I just started to love it even more. And how it's just it's extremely sharp. It's very cerebral, and I love that it doesn't lay everything out for you. It's not only is it open ended, but it doesn't give all the thematic elements away. It doesn't tell you everything that it's trying to say. And I think that because of that, it allows people to interpret it in different ways. Once we start talking later, I know HT has a different interpretation than the majority does, but it seems like there's a lot you can take away from this depending on what kind of person you are, where you're at in your life, how you perceive certain people and things about your life and other people's lives. And it's, to me, it's I will agree with HT that I don't think it hit me as hard emotionally as Arrival did, because that ending was like a wow thing for me, and like I really felt it even after I saw it a second time. And this one for me, it was more of a constant feeling of uneasiness and dread and just feeling very unsettled. Some of it was because of the monster movie stuff, others was because of the psychological elements of it. But I found myself being very drawn to it, and even now I still can't stop thinking about it. And I really liked it a lot.
Chris, you wrote this whole spoiler review, like, what is it, 4,000 words or something for slashfilm.com?
Yeah, it's a lot of words.
So boil that down to one paragraph for us.
No, yeah, I this movie blew me away. It's one of those movies that I just can't stop thinking about, and at the same time, as I was watching it, I knew that it was going to be a very polarizing film. Like, I could literally feel the audience I was seeing this with just start to lose the movie, especially near the end. They just started to just disengage. It was like they were pulling a plug, basically. They were just like, I've had enough of this weirdness. I can't put up with it anymore. And I sympathize with that. There's nothing I hate more than someone who's like, you're wrong for disliking a movie. And if you dislike this movie, I get it. But at the same time, this is, like you said, Peter, it's early in the year, but I can tell this is definitely going to be on my best of 2018 list when, the end of the year rolls around. It's just a very effective, haunting movie. And it was a lot more almost like existential than I thought it was going to be. Even having read the book, there's this underlying message in the film that's very downbeat, which I think is also going to turn a lot of people off. But for me, I loved it.
I definitely agree with you that this is one of those movies, I think, like, 2001, or, you see it and you totally understand why people are not going to like it while you're watching it and while you're enjoying it. This is also, I think, I mentioned 2001, and, people have been trying to solve that since the 70s. But in your review, you talk about kind of like this recent era of people trying to solve entertainment.
Right. Yeah. So, I don't have any hard data to back this up, but I feel like this all traces back to the show Lost. I feel like that show was such a cultural phenomenon that it rewired people's brains on how they watch entertainment now. And because that show, the nature of Lost was always every week was like, where is this going? Where is this mystery leading to? Everyone sort of got into this mindset that anytime something is deliberately enigmatic or mysterious, that it's something you have to try and solve. And I feel like more often than not, some audiences, especially in the film Twitter bubble, they act like they have to be smarter than the film, like they're trying to outsmart the film. And I think that's a really incorrect way to watch stuff, especially a movie like this. Like, I feel like this movie, a big part of it is that it's unsolvable. You're not going to really get all the answers from this film. And the same thing with 2001. You're never going to have all the answers. And part of the fun is having it up to interpretation. And I feel like more often than not, people are just trying to nail down one specific conclusion. And I just think that's a kind of boring way to approach, especially something like this. But that's me. If you think otherwise, more power to you. But
one thing that I think that's interesting is, this film has kind of an open-ended ending, and I feel like a lot of people give blockbusters, coming from studios like Disney, flack for, they're just trying to set up a sequel when that happens. But then when they see a film like this, like critics, like you, defend this ending. So I'm wondering, why is it when it's populist entertainment that we look down upon that, but when it's, something like this, that's elevated, that we defend it?
I don't know. I don't have that answer. People are a mystery to me in general, so I don't know why some people look at it like that. I do occasionally get bothered by ambiguous endings, but I feel like the film has to earn it. I guess that's the way I'd approach it. And I feel like this film is so ambiguous to begin with that it earns its ambiguous ending. But if your film is, for the most part, straightforward, and then you just throw an ambiguous ending there at the end, that is a bad idea. So I think it's more about earning that ending. I think this film earns it.
And there's a big difference, too, between the way that, Peter, like you're mentioning, like Marvel movies or something will leave the door open for a character to come back in a sequel or something like that versus the quote-unquote open-ended aspect of this movie's ending. It's like, as you're watching Annihilation, you can tell that there's not going to be a sequel to this movie because you can feel the money just like dripping away as you're watching the movie. You know that nobody is going to come see this. The word of mouth is not going to be that great. It's going to become a cult film, if anything else. So it's not really the same kind of. It's like apples and oranges. You can't. It's not really the same thing.
But you don't think when Paramount was making this, they're like, oh, there's 2 more books in the series. This ending is great because it's going to set up, future sequels.
I honestly don't think that they felt that way. I think they were probably like, all right, let's just let's minimize the damage here as much as possible because this movie, it's been done. This is it. Maybe in the early stages, they were thinking like, when they were looking at scripts and drafts and stuff like that, maybe they had that in mind. But I feel like once they saw what Alex Garland produced here, they must have known. They're smart enough to know that this is not going to be a movie that's going to draw in huge audiences. So I don't think it's open-ended in the same way that a lot of other things are.
Okay, now that we've ranted about the solving entertainment problem of today, let's actually try to solve entertainment, guys. I want to talk about the ending. We do have on the site, Lindsay Romaine wrote this article called Making Sense of That Annihilation Ending, which touches upon more stuff than we're going to get to here. But I want to hear, what do you guys think of that tunnel? What is the tunnel at the end of the movie?
Well, in the book, there is they come across this structure, and the biologist character keeps calling it the tower, even though it goes into the ground like a tunnel. And eventually they find out the walls are alive and they're breathing. And so I'm guessing when Alex Garland was adapting this, he took from that. But the film's version is a lot different than the book version. I mean, pretty much everything in the film is different than the book. But I don't think I don't really have a good guess on what the film's version is going to be, other than, at the beginning of the film, we see that meteor crash right by the lighthouse, and I'm guessing that's supposed to be like the crater that was created when that meteor landed.
Does anybody else here have any theories?
Well, I don't like to call it a theory, but I like that the tunnel is this sort of goes into my reading of the movie, in that it's about sort of evolution and creation, and how the structure of this tunnel and the cave that it opens up to is very womb-like. And it also has sort of parallels of like the descent into hell as well. So there's a lot of mixed metaphors that I'm kind of going with here. But I think that it speaks a lot to this sort of doppelganger that we see, and that this is where it's incepted and created, and how it's made in the image of man, but almost made to be better or something. So it's sort of my reading of this tunnel and the strange sort of cave was that it's a womb of some sort of area where life can be created, and new life hence spreads from there and takes over. And that's what life is. It's not so much, it's both gift giving and also it takes away, in that it's like the whole metaphor of the movie, in that it's a cancerous sort of, it's almost cancerous in the way that it overtakes everything.
Is that Lena at the end of the movie?
Well, I interpreted it as that it was not, because we see at the end when Lena and Kane hug, both of their eyes shimmer, and it's implied that they're both the doppelgangers. We see on camera that Kane, the real Kane, was killed, he killed himself with the phosphorus bomb, and it was his double who made his way to Lena's house. And then at the end, when Kane asks, "Are you Lena?" she doesn't answer and just hugs him, and they both have their eyes shimmer like that. So I interpret it as them being these doppelgangers that we don't know who they are for what they are or what they really want, and neither do they really. So that was my interpretation.
Does anyone here think it could actually still be Lena?
I think it is her, just because the way it's shot, the way it was filmed to me looked a lot like the quote unquote real Lena blew up the fake one. I think the shimmering at the end is representing that, Area X, or the shimmer as they call it in the movie, keeps changing everyone who goes into it. So I feel like maybe that's why her eyes are glowing at the end, but I could be wrong.
That was my interpretation as well.
I actually kind of like to think of it more, maybe a little more abstractly, as to who are we to say who the real Lena is? Because if you extrapolate this to go along with, and Chris dives into this a bit in his extensive breakdown about how there's a lot of elements in here about the idea of depression and who we are and how it defines people and how we self-destruct because of it. And so that, who's to say that it's not Lena, but it's not the version of Lena who has come face to face with, her depressed self and the self-destructive side of her, and come out on the other side a little bit differently. Maybe not like how we knew her before, but somebody who has come face to face with, her own inner demons and problems, and is now essentially seeming like a different person, but maybe isn't entirely.
Taking a darker reading to that, I've seen that depression analysis as well, and I've heard some theories that, not theories, but the reading is that this is the doppelganger, and the doppelganger is a representation of her depression, and how, in some senses, when depression takes over, it destroys a huge part of us, and it's the only thing that's left living, in a sense, taking over our body, which is a really depressing way of reading it. I think it whichever way you read it is kind of indicative of what kind of person you are and how you would perceive the world.
Yeah, I think that's so cool that it could go either way, and I think that you can do that with a lot of the characters too. You could specifically with Tessa Thompson's character, I kind of struggle with what we're supposed to take away from that, because we know that she had dealt with self-harm before. She has scars all over her arms from cutting herself and whatnot. And so when she gives in to the shimmer, is that her giving up and essentially, committing suicide, or is that her giving into the positive side and moving away from her depression? I feel like you can read it either way. Does anybody else have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, that was the scene that really struck me the most when I was watching the film. That was the part that I think that really stayed with me. And I felt like I've had a more positive takeaway from that scene, in that, she doesn't want to fight and she doesn't want to face her fears either, but she just wants to exist, in a sense. And I felt like it was her way of accepting her role in this cycle of life, vicious as it may be. And I thought that was almost really beautiful in a way, that she was becoming a tree, and a tree is sort of the symbol of life itself and everything like that. So I think that was my reading in a way.
I guess if I have any problem with this ending, I really liked the WTF, tunnel stuff when it was going kind of batshit crazy. All that I was in for. Once you came to the ending where they actually do that reveal with the eye, I feel like that seems too much of a normal sci-fi horror movie ending. Which I know a lot of people would probably disagree. A lot of probably mainstream America would want to know more, but I feel like I want more of the Inception ending, where they cut away before you find out anything. Do you know what I mean?
It's actually, I'm sorry for talking so much, but
yeah.
It's actually an ending that is really reflective, I think, of a lot of Alex Garland's work, and how he has an ending with a character who is not quite human. For example, at the end of Ex Machina, we see Ava, I think that was her name, stepping out into the world, and we don't know exactly what she will do or where that will take her. And it becomes not a sort of, dire sci-fi threat, but a sort of questioning of humanity in a way, and whether they will be able to live as humans or whether they want to live as humans, in a sense, and whether that humanity still stays with them or not, if that makes sense.
Okay, I think it's now time to move on to talking about this film thematically. Brad kind of touched upon this earlier. Chris, I saw in your piece your spoiler-free reaction, spoiler review, not spoiler-free reaction, which is on /film.com. We'll link it in the show notes. People should go read that. But you talked a bit about what this movie is talking thematically about to you, or what your reading is of it. So tell us about it.
I mean, yeah, I don't want to get too depressing and or personal, but the thing that struck me most about this film is just the way it's very almost subtly addressing just, depression and anxiety and even like suicidal tendencies. And, that whole ending where Natalie Portman's character is literally fighting with herself was, to me, one of the most like accurate on-screen interpretations of, battling with depression, because it literally is just like that, where you're just literally, you can't get out of your own way, so to speak. You're just, your own, mind is just bogging you down. And, there's a part of you that knows like, this is, insane. This shouldn't be happening. And I should be able to get out of this, but you really can't. Nothing you do really seems to work. And that whole conclusion really got to me. And I think what got to me more is that there's not like an uplifting twist where it's like, yes, she overcame that depression. Even though she gets out of Area X, even though she gets out of the Shimmer, she's still, taking a part of it with her. And on one level, that's depressing and that's very downbeat. But I appreciated that the film didn't try and present this sort of like easy way out, where it's like, yeah, she overcame all her troubles and everything is okay again, because that's not really how depression is either. You can, get medicated for it, you can go to therapy, but it's always going to be there in the back of your mind, so to speak. And so that really affected me on that level, especially the ending.
See, I love this reading of it, because I usually am good at, figuring or, connecting with those thematic, even subtle thematic, undertones of a movie. And for some reason or another, it did not connect with me, or I did not realize it until, talking to you guys on Slack and, realizing everybody going into this, into the Shimmer all have kind of like, problems, with depression or anxiety. So it's something that it didn't register to me. Chris, you also have an article on the site about the original ending to the original Annihilation script and how it was very different than this ending. What happened in the original script?
So the original ending, it's mostly the same, where, Natalie Portman's character comes out of the Shimmer and she reunites with Oscar Isaac's character. And, she asks the same question. She says, are you Kane? And he says, I don't think so. Are you Lena? And she doesn't answer him. So all that is the same. And then they hug and, their eyes glow. And then it says over Natalie Portman's shoulder out the window, you can see a shooting star, and then another shooting star, and then another. And then it's revealed these are all meteors like we saw at the beginning of the film. And inside the meteors is more of, the Shimmer, if you want to call it that. So it's this sort of like alien invasion ending in a way that I'm glad they didn't go with, because as much as, the glowing eyes thing is a, sort of horror movie trope, I feel like ending with like a full-fledged alien invasion is that to the nth degree. So I'm glad they didn't use that.
And your article also has a bunch of other Annihilation script changes, which we won't talk about here, but there's, a difference in Josie's death. There's no framing device. You can go to /film.com and read about what else was different in the initial script. But the other thing I wanted to talk to you about, Chris, is the differences between the book and the film. So, Chris, this is a lot different than the book, right?
Yes, very, very different.
So what is the book about? And I guess spoilers for the book coming up.
I mean, the core element is still the same. It's an all-female team going into this mysterious zone. But the book, it's a lot more, like the threat is more ecological, I guess you could say. Like they don't come right out and say it's aliens. Like at the end of the movie, Jennifer Jason Leigh literally is talking about aliens, and none of that is in the book. It's more mysterious, and they even actually think it's sort of like man-made for a while, the thing that's causing Area X. And the article on /film.com goes into a lot more detail, but just for instance, when they go into Area X in the book, it just looks like the wilderness, whereas in the movie it's very weird and the sky is like a abnormal color, and the book is a lot more subtle about what's different there. There's no there is like a monster that shows up in the book, but there's no giant alligator, there's no monster bear, none of that is in the book. And a lot of the characters are different in the book too. The book is really only focused on the biologist and the psychologist. And the rest of the team, one of them backs out before they even go through. And then another one dies almost instantly. And then a third member of the team is missing for a big chunk of the book. So the movie fleshes those characters out a lot more, gives them a lot more to do. It also gives them names. In the book, they're just known by their title. The biologist, the surveyor, the psychologist. You never learn their names in the book. So, I guess I understand why Alex Garland felt he had to give them names, because reading a book is a lot different than watching a movie. But the book, it's more concerned with like archetypes, I guess you could say, than actual individual characters.
What about the ending of the book? Is that fair? Yeah.
Well, it's a lot different because in the movie, Natalie Portman, she burns down the lighthouse and effectively ends the Shimmer. That's another thing. The book, there's no such thing as the Shimmer. It's called Area X. They never call it the Shimmer. That I don't know why they felt the need to give it that name in the movie, but that's neither here or there. But in the book literally ends with the biologist. She's been writing the whole book in like a diary, and she says, I'm going to go deeper into Area X. Please don't come look for me. And then the book just sort of ends there. And then it picks up, with the sequel. But so the book is a lot more open-ended. There's no like conclusion like the movie has.
I would be so disappointing if I was reading that book and it just came to that kind of ending.
Well, all three books actually came out at once. It wasn't like released. Yeah, so he wrote it as a trilogy, and then they released all three books at the same period of time. So I'm sure like if it had been parsed out like that, if you read that book, it ended, you'd be like fuck this. But he did think ahead to make them all available at once.
Okay, when I came out of the theater, the first thing I'm thinking of is, they're not going to make a sequel to this movie. It's not going to make enough money to warrant a sequel, sadly. But I was, wondering, they made 2 sequels to the book. What happens? I couldn't imagine what possibly happens next. It sounds like the book was a lot different than the movie. But what I'm going to ask you is, you wrote the story for the site about the 2 books and, what the Annihilation sequels we'll never see were about. So I guess we're going to give spoilers for these 2 books. So where did the story take us in the sequels?
So the second book, Authority, it actually turns into almost like a spy novel, which I really thought was cool because instead of being about the biologist, it's now about this new character. He goes by the name Control, and he's the new director of the Southern Reach, which is, the government organization investigating Area X. And so he takes over the Southern Reach, and the biologist character magically reappears near her house, sort of like Oscar Isaac's character does in the movie. And so the Southern Reach picks her up, and most of the book is spent with Control interviewing the biologist. And she tells him almost right away that she's actually not the biologist. She's a clone created by Area X. And, he thinks she's making that up, but, we, of course, know it's the truth. And, most of that book is just him getting to know her, and then there's a lot more background into his character about how he's been a failure his whole career, and he was on a previous mission where he got a woman killed, and it's a lot different than the first book. And it's actually, the second book is my favorite book in the series, just because it's so different than the first one that you don't actually expect that to happen. And at the end of that book, Control and the biologist clone go back to Area X. And so the third book, Acceptance, goes back in time and shows how Area X turned into Area X. And there's this lighthouse keeper who basically morphs into a monster. And we also get a lot more background about the psychologist character played by Jennifer Jason Leigh in the film. We learn that she grew up in the location that eventually became Area X. And when she was a kid, she was friends with the lighthouse keeper. And so that was sort of why she's always been obsessed with Area X, because she wants to go back in there and find this lighthouse keeper that she was friends with as a child. We also get more with Control and the biologist clone, and they come across the original biologist, who is now turned into a giant monster made up of thousands of eyes. So it's really, it's very, very strange. So I have no doubt neither of these will be turned into films, especially because the way the movie ends, it leaves no room for any of this to happen. But that's the basic gist of what happens in those two books.
Well, crazy.
Peter, real quick before we end, can I float one more reading of the ending of the movie to you? Okay. So I know that you guys talked a lot about depression and stuff, and I sort of felt that when I was watching the movie, but I also sort of took away almost like a feminist reading from the end of this movie, because it ends with the lighthouse being burned, and there's this really evocative shot of Natalie Portman standing there and watching this lighthouse burning on fire in front of her, and it's very like obviously a phallic symbol. And then this comes right after she had just almost literally been reborn by going into, as HT talked about, this sort of womb-like area down in this tunnel, and then emerging out of this like this canal basically up into the light again. And the idea of the shimmer forming out and sort of expanding from this phallic symbol made me think that maybe the shimmer could be representative of, like toxic masculinity, because if you look at what happens when all of the men go into the shimmer, especially what happens with Oscar Isaac's character, he ends up cutting somebody open from the inside. There's, it's just causing all these infections and this cancer that is being dropped on society and slowly spreading and about to take over everything, and there's nothing you can do about it. And just the idea that 4 women would, strap themselves in and go in to battle this thing, and that would be the only thing that could potentially take down this cancerous force. I just thought it was a really powerful imagery, and just sort of an alternate take on the depression metaphor that's been thrown around a lot.
No, that's a very interesting take. Sadly, we have hit the wall of going way over our time limit for this podcast, so I'm going to cut it off here. You can find all the articles we talked about today. There's like 5 different Annihilation pieces in the show notes and on slashfilm.com. You can find this podcast, Slash Film Daily, published every weekday on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, all the popular podcast apps. Please go rate and review us on iTunes. Spread the word, tell your friends, and we'll see you tomorrow.